It's AM 1160 WCCS and 101.1 FM. Bob Pollock is with us. You can give Bob a call at 479-1160 or 349-WCCS. That's 349-9227. Ask him your questions about lawns and gardens and such. Remind you that we have a 2-hour delay for Penns Manor and Purchase Line school districts, and Indiana County Head Start centers, except Indiana 4 and 5, are closed. Had somebody stop in, Bob. They said, I've got a big problem. My big problem is Tree of Heaven. You know about Tree of Heaven, don't you?
I do.
It's an awful nasty invasive plant from China, isn't it?
And it's been around here a long time.
Yeah.
And we've
How do you get rid of it?
Pretty much ignored it.
He was quite the expert on it. He said that if you saw it down, the plant senses that it's in trouble, and so it shoots out more roots. In fact, he said he took out a bunch, and he had like 30 more within a couple of months. They're everywhere, and he can't get rid of them. What do you do with Tree of Heaven, which is also known as stinking sumac? I looked online. There's stinking sumac because it looks like sumac, but it stinks.
Yeah, Alanthus is the other name for it, but it's very commonly known as Tree of Heaven, and it can get to be a fairly large shade tree, essentially.
Yeah, I guess there's one out back in our parking lot.
That's entirely possible.
Growing up through the roof of some guy's car.
They are very able to grow in challenging situations, along roadsides, up through concrete, numerous places.
They shoot off poisons to other plants so other plants can't grow, I was reading about, near them.
Yeah, there's we would call that allelopathy, which is the ability of plants, and there are a number of different plants that give off chemicals that suppress, that try to give that particular plant the upper hand, and suppress or keep other plants from growing. So they have the ability to do that. And there are grains that are able to do that, a number of different types of plants that just give off these different chemicals that will suppress other plants. So that gives them another leg up. They grow fast. Very common to see them, although they blend in very well. They look just like a lot of other trees. So they're very commonly along the roadsides and abandoned places and compacted sites and numerous sites like that. But they grow up to be a very large tree if we don't do anything about them. And they are pretty competitive as well.
Yeah. He said like they shoot off 350,000 spores.
Yeah, and they can shoot new branches from the roots. So you cut them off, and they can reshoot. So yes, it's a very competitive, invasive tree.
What do we do with this mean little thing?
Well, first, kind of have to acknowledge that it's there. Figure out that, this is a Tree of Heaven. And there's various keys and things that we can bring up on the internet to help us identify this tree from other trees. And then once you know you have it, then you can start to look at the situation. How many do I have? Is it just one tree? What's the situation? And then we can cut them down, and that's typically what's going to happen first. And then but with this one, you also need to treat the stump too, to help it reduce the amount of resprouting that occurs.
Okay.
And you have to keep after it. That's in a lot of situations, it's difficult to rogue it out. You might be able to get in and with the dozer and get the root system
out.
Rip
that baby out of there?
Yeah, and get it out as much as possible.
I'm not guessing the average homeowner is going to say, I've got a Tree of Heaven, I got to get rid of it. Let's get the bulldozer.
Yeah. But some of these invasive plants are very challenging to get rid of, and that's why they're invasive, because they come in, they are very competitive, they take over native plant habitats, and we have flowers and shrubs and trees, and then you get into the animal species as well. In any case, we have these insects, diseases, where we don't have the competition, so it's a foreign pest, and it comes in. We don't have, other plants aren't able to compete with it, and so it takes over.
Yeah.
And And then once that happens, it becomes very challenging for most of these to eradicate them. We can maybe keep them in check but it usually takes various means to do that.
I'm sure this gentleman is listening, and he's not very hopeful from your answer here this morning about what he can do for this. But chop the thing out of there and treat the stump.
Yeah.
That's what you got to do.
Yeah, and then as it resprouts, and I don't know if this is an area where you can brush hog, where you can get in there, and as that resprouts, to get those mowed off and keep it down. Eventually, that root system will die out. If there are no, if they can't have branches and leaves in order to feed itself, then that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to starve it to death, and that can take a while, years. I'll die out before it dies out. This is what you're saying. No, I think you'll last longer.
Marginally. All right, so there's Tree of Heaven. That's a nasty one. 479-1160, 349-WCCS if you'd like to talk to Bob Pollock this morning. Okay, what else going on?
But a lot of invasive plants, one of the main tactics is you're trying to keep it from going. So if it's a plant that flowers and seeds, we want to break that cycle. So you've got to keep it from flowering and especially reproducing seed. Because then that seed, it might just land where it is, but we might have birds pick it up or eat it. It might still be edible to the birds, for example, and then they move it down the road.
They distribute. In their own
redistribute way. It, yes.
Usually on my windshield.
That can. Fortunately, it probably won't grow there. So that's okay.
We hope.
You have to clean it up. But wind, storm fronts, all those things, depending on the type of seed it is, will kind of help dictate how far it can move, whether it's a local problem or whether it can move long distances.
All right, so we're dealing with invasive plants and bugs and creatures of some sort here today. Speaking of which, the emerald ash borer is one that we have noted here in the last 10 years. And there are other invasive insects in this case. All we need to do really is look at the pine trees along any hillside or any forested area, and you see that they're under attack. I basically lost my entire crop of 250. When you have trees that grow to anywhere between 6 feet tall and 30 feet tall, it's difficult to treat them all. I mean, how do you spray a tree that's 30 feet tall? You can't do that.
No, and that becomes part of the issue in dealing with some of these pests, especially insects and diseases. Depending on the tools we have available, you might have to get a large truck in with a sprayer, and they can, under high pressure, can get the water and the chemical up in the tree and get it distributed. And that used to be very commonly done. That can be done in certain situations. It can't in others. They use aerial applications. So when we get into larger blocks or wooded areas, say with the gypsy moth.
Just a flyover.
Yeah, they do a flyover to treat those areas. And, of course, you have to have the money to be able to do that. So with a number of pests, the hemlock woolly adelgid, that's one that's been attacking hemlock trees for a while. And that's a big problem in those stands that are in the woods or on state land. They don't have the money to be able to treat those. So you're slowly seeing a decline in those populations. And even with the gypsy moth, not all the stands of oaks were able to be treated. So you try to preserve, kind of look at it statewide, decide what you can preserve, what's most important, and that might be inside of a park area. And depending on how critical that is, then that's where you put your resources. The pest will help dictate some of that too. How fast is its ability to spread? Now, some of the diseases that we've had around for 100 years, but they're not all in all places at the same time, and that will move around and shift. So you probably ended up with a needle cast disease on your pines. And for a long time, everything was okay. And then you can get into a period of different stresses, whether we go through drought or times when the soil's saturated with moisture, we get too much moisture, then that can cause some root decline because there's too much water in there. And then we get the tree stressed, then it becomes more susceptible to attack by some of these organisms.
You see it particularly in my area, but I haven't examined other areas, but it's probably the case there as well, that once those pests get started, they strip trees pretty quickly. And out in our area, everywhere you look, the pine trees are all stripped. They sort of avoid the blue spruces, but they love those green pines.
And a lot of pests are specific to certain, like they'll only attack pines or they'll only attack spruce. Just that one species of plant is what that pest was adapted to attack, just like the ash borer. There's only one other genus of plants that they know of, that the white fringe tree, that ash borer will also attack.
Mm-hmm.
So very specific, but very devastating. And then there are other pests that are more cosmopolitan that will attack a number of different species. And so even if you have species diversity, you still can be susceptible to damage from that.
Well, this has been an uplifting conversation this morning with Bob Pollock, and we're out of time. Thank goodness. It's Indiana in the Morning, AM 1160 WCCS, 101.1 FM.